Hi, everyone. My name is Asbeidy Solano, and I'm an academic program counselor at AAP here at UCLA. I'm going into my fourth year as an academic counselor, but my experience goes across a couple different institutions. I worked at a nonprofit organization as a college advisor in Boston, and then after that, I worked as an academic counselor at Bunker Hill Community College. Today, I want to share with you all a bit about my academic journey. I'll be sharing with you all how my lived experiences as the daughter of immigrants, as a first generation college and graduate student, have motivated me to become an academic counselor and has also informed my practice. I hope that in sharing my academic journey with you all, you're all reminded of the amount of courage that our students have in being their first in the families to get into college, to then graduate from college and then become trailblazers in their communities. So I'd like to start off by sharing my family's migration story. My mom, dad, and brother migrated from Oaxaca, Mexico in the early 90s with the goal of buying a pickup truck from their party supply business. My father was a cyclical, undocumented migrant going back and forth between Oaxaca and California. And with the weight of the hot sun on his back and the pressure to provide for my young brother and mother back in Mexico, my dad picked garlic, grapes, pistachios, and cherries in California's Central Valley. He sent money to Mexico so that my brother could have food and clothes to wear to school. These were things that my father didn't have as a child. While my brother now had his material needs met, it was at the cost of missing his father. Renan, my brother, cried at the sight of airplanes in the sky, wondering if his father was in one. No longer willing to live away from one another, my dad saved money for several months so that my brother and mother could migrate across the US-Mexico border. They crossed with a coyote, a smuggler, and faith that things were going to get better moving forward. After hearing these stories as a child and teenager, I felt motivated to do well in school. After all, having to read, write, and study sounded a lot easier than having to pick in the fields of Oaxaca or California. I felt lucky that I didn't have to endure poverty in Mexico, and I felt that working hard and doing well in school was how I could honor my family's sacrifices. As my brother entered his teenage years, he found peace and happiness in playing the drums and painting abstract art. But the older he got, the more he was policed. My brother and parents began arguing over his school expulsions, and my brother was increasingly stopped and frisked on his way home from school. In Mexican families, the saying goes, either you go to school or you work, but you can't just do nothing. Our parents could not afford the expensive art college my brother dreamed of going to. So my brother balanced full-time restaurant work and full-time art college. And after 2 years of juggling work and school, he stopped out. When Renan stopped out and was not contributing to our household income, our father erupted. This exacerbated the tension that already existed between them. And without support in school and in failing to meet our family's expectations, my brother was left with little family support. In my junior year of high school, when my brother was 24 years old, he was incarcerated for the first time. I witnessed my brother's tumultuous life at home and in school, and I was terrified of not meeting our father's expectations. You get a college degree and you make the family proud. Like many Mexican daughters who grew up in Catholic families, I felt an immense amount of pressure to be the family saint or La Santa. I was to get straight A's, I wasn't allowed to talk back, and above all else, I was to put my family first. My brother's incarceration intensified these expectations for me and the fear of not meeting them. The weight of our parents' dreams of having their children go to college and become professionals rested heavily on my shoulders. At times, I'm in awe that I even went to college. I did not study for the SAT, and I did not receive any college application support from any adults at my high school. However, I was diligent with my homework, and I did take honors and AP courses, and my grades were good. I did what I was told by teachers, and the fear of not doing well kept me awake through late nights of studying. I was too afraid that asking for help would make me look dumb, and it just seemed like everybody else knew what they were doing. And my best friend Saleh was also on her way to become a first-generation college student, and she was one of two people in my high school who knew about my brother's incarceration. Amongst all the posturing we witnessed from teenagers with college-educated parents, she created a space for me to belong. We confessed to each other that we had no idea what we were doing, and we supported each other with our college applications. We asked each other, what are you putting for question 34? Am I the child of a farm worker if my dad was a farm worker in the 80s? Am I Native American or Chicana Mexican American? When I was admitted to UC Riverside, I promised myself that I would ask for help in ways that I was too afraid to ask for when I was in high school, because it was clear to me that I was paving a path unknown to my family. Seven years ago, I became the first person in my family to graduate from college. And while that sounds like a long time ago, it feels really recent. And I think this is in part because this journey was quite challenging for me. And it has taken me many years to process what that journey meant to me. While I started my college journey motivated and full of energy, I reached my senior year of college completely depleted. I kept myself busy every summer with work, classes, or research, and I worked for UC Riverside Housing, meaning that there was no separation between work, school, and life. I felt pressure to work for housing because this was how I was paying for school. I responded to student crises while ignoring my own, and I did keep my promise to myself about asking for help. However, it was centered on my academics and my pathway to the PhD. On the outside, I was doing great. On paper, I was doing great. I got into my dream graduate program and I was receiving departmental and college awards. But at the end of it all, I felt like I deserved none of it. I was on a fast track to transition straight into a PhD program from undergrad, but when I looked around me, I felt like I had very few people with me on this journey. I was the only Latina in my department and my year pursuing a PhD program, and the road felt lonely. I craved to see someone like me going through the challenging journey of maybe one day joining the professorate so that we could shape knowledge on the educational experiences of the children of immigrants. 2 years ago, my partner asked me, who is one stranger who changed your life? Tears poured out of me, and 5 years after graduating college, I was shocked at my body's release of pain and grief. With a frown on my face and looking into my partner's curious eyes, I said, Stanton. Stanton was a graduate student who was a teaching assistant in the sociology department at UC Riverside. I'd seen him present at conferences, and he was kind to every student who went into his office. My honors thesis advisor said, Asbeidy, you'll probably hear this from the other graduate students, but Stanton committed suicide during spring break. Stanton's suicide left me distraught as I witnessed the waves of shock from undergraduate students who were taught by him and the graduate students who called him friend or colleague. Stanton's death came at a time when I was having thoughts of self-harming and was wondering what it would be like if I left this earth. After Stanton's death, I broke my silence and I let my good college friend Vilma know that I had thoughts of hurting myself. Vilma encouraged me to make an appointment with a campus therapist, so I made the appointment during finals week of my senior year. But graduating also meant that I did not receive the long-term support that I needed. I began graduate school completely burnt out and exhausted. Little did I know that I needed all the rest in the world to withstand the sexism, racism, elitism, and isolation that I would experience in the department. I was the youngest person in my program, and I was often confused for an undergraduate student. I still am, by the way. And I often wondered if people really thought I was an undergraduate or if I just challenged their expectations of what a doctoral student looked like. In my first year, imposter syndrome engulfed me and it silenced me. In my immigration graduate seminars, I increasingly became silent. Anytime I shared how my lived experiences were tied to the theories we were learning in class, I received blank stares from my faculty instructor. Over time, these instances had a big impact on my already deteriorated mental health because the indirect message I was consistently receiving was that I did not belong there. Although I was a doctoral student in the sociology department, I received support in my second and third years of my program from a faculty member in the Chicano-Latino Studies department at UC Irvine. This, unfortunately, was the reality of some PhD students of color in my department because we did not feel fully supported in our program. So we sought support outside of the department. After a terrible breakup and news that my brother was in jail for a third time, as a first-gen grad student, and after surviving college, I was struggling with my mental health and my master's thesis. I was losing hair, I was losing weight, and I was also losing my sense of self. On my third resubmission of my master's thesis, my thesis advisor called me into her office and asked me, Asbeidy, what's your goal in getting your PhD? She was concerned about all of my missed deadlines, and she noticed that, unlike other students in the department, I didn't really talk about having friends. No matter how hard I tried to keep tears from rolling down my face, her question unlocked a fear that maybe she could see just how much I was struggling. I said, my goal is to become a professor and an immigration scholar. She shared her concern with my progress in the program. My biggest fear was happening. The one person I felt supported by at UCI was going to tell me that I should consider leaving. I cried in her office, and like the experienced interviewer she was, she handed me tissues and she just listened. I let her know that I did contemplate leaving the program and that I was afraid of what my father would say. That day, she planted a seed in me. She challenged me to really reflect on my values, my goals, and my aspirations, and whether they still aligned with me being in the program. Amid all this, I met Daniel, another grad student in the department. Danny made me feel like I wasn't struggling alone because he shared his struggles with completing his MA, along with the little support he received as an undocumented grad student. He invited me to hot yoga classes, and this was my time for me to release my frustrations and to then be able to go to sleep after class, knowing that tomorrow was going to be a new day. At the end of each class, I had a release of emotions, and I would sometimes call it a revelation. I call it a revelation because it kind of helped me gain a new understanding about the root behind the meaning of the emotions I was experiencing. At the end of one of my hot yoga classes, I laid on a yoga mat at the end of the session and I began crying. As I laid on the yoga mat, I realized that I was frustrated at myself because all I wanted was for my dad to accept me just the way I was. However, I realized that that wasn't going to come, and that wasn't going to come because his expectations were for me to graduate from the program. Leaving my PhD program was a process of at least 4 months of really contemplating what it would mean for me to leave. All I had ever known at that point in my life was academics, so leaving meant contending with my identity as a student and the validation that I sought from my parents for being the daughter who did well in school and brought the family pride. I ultimately decided to leave the program, and it was a crossroads for me. It was a crossroads for me because I really needed to decide on how I was going to reshape my relationship to academia, whether I wanted to reshape that relationship. And I reflected on the parts of grad school that made me feel excluded, but I also reflected on the parts that made me feel like I could make a difference. I felt like I could make a difference when I was working with students, when I was TAing for Chicano-Latino studies classes, as I felt that we were co-creating a space for all of us to belong at UCI. And so when I left my PhD program, I said, I want to be an academic counselor because I want to be somebody who proactively frames and reframes and shapes the experiences of students as they navigate college, as I felt that this was something that was missing in my experience. I want to thank you all for listening to the tough parts of my journey and for joining me today as I shared my story. I want to share that this is a continuous process of healing for me, and that this ACE Talk is part of that for me. And I also want to share with you all a little bit about what I learned in leaving my program. I learned that we must treat students as leaders in their educational journeys. Because I was doing well academically, many higher ed educators saw me as a student with the potential to go into a PhD program. However, because my support was so centered on academics and not other aspects of my life or my education, such as my mental health, my financial health, career exploration beyond the PhD route, I felt that a PhD program was my only path. Rather than leading my journey, I felt that as though I was following along with what other people told me to do and told me that I was good at doing. This was especially hard to do when I was a first generation college student, learning to navigate college, but also trying to find my voice at the same time. So we must ask students questions that challenge them to reflect on what really motivates them, the futures that they want to build, and if this is something that is rooted in courage, love, or fear. This is how students grow, and this is how we teach students to become confident leaders in their education and their lives. Difficult decisions can be done in community. Difficult decisions are scary to make, and sometimes decisions alone can be scary to make. We know this of like first year students, transfer students, students experiencing transitions in their education. So before leaving my program, I talked to my friends about my fears in leaving. I talked to my parents and especially my dad about how important it was for me to leave my program for my happiness and well-being. I checked in with my master's thesis advisor about the conversations I was having with others, and my partner supported me along the way. I would not have reached this point of reflection had my MA thesis advisor not had me revisit my motivation and purpose behind leaving the PhD program, or behind pursuing the PhD program. Pursuing a PhD program is something that I thought about long and hard before entering the program, while I was applying to the program, and during the program. However, I think what made a difference for me was that it was my master's thesis advisor who asked me that question. When I was contemplating leaving, my partner said, Asbeidy, you can feel supported in the decision to leave. And while this feels so obvious to me now, it felt so life-changing at the time because I was really terrified of making what felt like such a big life-altering decision. Making decisions in community and with the support of a community encourages students to make informed decisions while having people to fall back on if they experience setbacks. And it allows students to also celebrate in community when they're successful in achieving their goals. I learned that a relationship with a student is dialectical, or that it goes both ways. This is a lesson that I learned when I was TAing classes for Chicano Latino Studies. If we ask students to be vulnerable with us, we must practice that with them as well. Otherwise, it's an extractive and harming process to them. Our goal is to build trusting relationships with students, and if the relationship is truly bidirectional, it can be a really fun and fulfilling experience to work with students. I truly believe that we can learn from students just as much as they can learn from us. Lastly, we must make a genuine effort to understand students within the context of their lives, and then incorporate that into our practice. Students have many roles in their lives: parents, daughters, siblings, and being a student is just one of them. I think this is especially true of transfer students and non-traditional students, parenting students. So when I meet with students, I ask, how are things going outside of school? This allows me to develop rapport with students, and it allows me to also assess if the other roles in their lives are conflicting with their student role. We can then try to find solutions for these roles to kind of coexist in harmony as much as possible. This encourages us to practice seeing students as their whole selves. I want to thank everyone who was with me on this journey. I know some of you are in the Zoom room right now. My family, my master thesis advisor, Daniel, who is my best friend and partner. We're married now. Sally, my childhood best friend, who's now a lawyer. She became a lawyer 2 weeks ago. And my UCLA pals, you know who you are, you're in this picture, who literally walked me over to the registrar 2 weeks ago to actually pick up my diploma at UCI Registrar when we were there for the UC AAC conference. I also want to thank Marian and Kelsey for coaching me through this process and for believing that my story was worth sharing. Thank you.